Hello, guys. Welcome to this live stream. I've got a very special guest here with me, Julie Eccles, and we will be talking about expropriation without compensation and why we white people need to support it. And while we wait for other people to tune in, I want to talk to you guys. I was just at the official book launch of this Kill the Boer book. It says their government complicity in South Africa's brutal farm murders. Very, very good book. I've actually read it before it was launched. I was given a copy, and I will also be doing a review of it soon on this channel. So, in any case, I hope you guys are looking forward to that. And if you want to read about the government complicity in the farm murders, there's a very good place to start. In any case, welcome to this channel, Julie.
Thanks for having me, Willem.
It's just a pleasure. All right. So, as you guys see, the title, the white people should support expropriation without compensation in South Africa. Why is that, Julie?
Well, let me just start my timer here, so we've got 5 minutes to lay that out.
You can really go over. It's not a problem.
Okay, cool, thanks. So, I mean, when we're looking at the situation that South Africa is in, we have to take it in context. And, we obviously have a long, long history of racial segregation and racial injustice, economic injustice for Black people, people of color. And, this is what's led to enormous racial inequality today. And there is a very clear mandate in our constitution for restitution for all of these problems. You can go down the list of all the various different laws that we've had over not just the last 100 years, but in fact the last 170 odd years that pertain to racial basically blocking people from being able to own land if they're a person of color, especially Black people. And there's a very clear mandate to right that. And then I think there's also a very strong underlying principle here that is a simple moral principle that which has been stolen should be returned. So if your iPhone has been stolen, if your pads have been stolen, they should be returned to you as the rightful owner. And it doesn't matter if that item or that piece of property has been gifted to another person, sold somewhere, or handed down. The principle remains that it should be returned. And so, just on a purely a matter of pure moral principle, everyone should support expropriation without compensation. And I think if you don't agree with that, then you don't agree with property protection, and you also don't agree with the principle of giving back what's been stolen. And I think those are pretty universal truths. I think every society believes in that. And I think once you agree to that, then it's just a matter of ironing out the details and going into the specifics and seeing where land has been stolen and where it can be returned. And so, there's a very strong principle there. And then I think now what we're doing is, I think we've decided to go forward as a country, and now we're looking at specific details. And obviously there's a commission that's been set up to look at that. So that's me. It's not very long. You can go right ahead.
All right. Thank you for that, Julie. I listened to what you said, and the first thing that I really have a problem with is we should give back what has been stolen here. Because if we look at the actual facts, in 1912, when the Land Act was passed under the England's law at that stage, Black people were occupying 9% of the land in South Africa, and after that they were given 13%. So they were actually given 5% of the land, what do you call it, oppervlakte, of the land here in South Africa, and that's more than they were occupying. So nothing has been stolen. That's the first thing. So we do agree that some places, Black people were moved. Some of the land that they were on were moved, but that was definitely not all of the places. Sorry, just gonna wait for that plane.
I think the police is looking for Willem.
All right, so the plane has passed. Any case, so not all land or not all black people were ever dispossessed, and not all land was stolen. The first thing we need to look at is what land was stolen, and that is a very, very, very small percentage, less than 1% of South Africa's land where people were actually moved. And it's not just black people. I know people who were farming, especially up north in Limpopo, in the Limpopo province, where white people's land were also taken by the government. And also, another thing that you said is that you believe in property rights, which is quite odd because you believe that the state should take it, because you said you support this bill, but this bill is not going to give the land back to any person, any individual, any black person. It's just going to take it and give it to the state, and then these black people, these so-called previously disadvantaged people, are going to are not going to be able to stay there. They are going to have to hire the land if they want to be there, and that's the crux of this bill. And then also, the other thing that you said is that all these injustices were done against black people, but the problem with that is apartheid was a very, very, very small part of South Africa's history. It was just 4 decades in a history that started about 400 years ago, when the first people who were not uh, Khoisan came to South Africa. And apartheid was just 4 decades, and it's already almost 3 decades before or after apartheid ended. And before apartheid started, the Afrikaans people were treated way worse in this country than black people were ever treated in this country by the English. And white people or white Afrikaans people never said they needed handouts from the state to uplift themselves. They uplifted themselves, and I see no way or no reason why black people in this country can't do it themselves. If the Afrikaans people could uplift themselves after 1948, after being severely oppressed, after being killed off in concentration camps, after being excluded from all academia and all schooling and all public sphere jobs and everything, why do the blacks need 3 decades and still achieve nothing, and still blame the fact that they haven't achieved anything as a group on the whites? So that's my side of it.
Okay, so there's quite a bit to deal with over there. Right.
All
Um,
right. So do you want to first ask me a question to answer, or can I start asking you questions?
oh, well, let me just deal with what you've just said.
All
So
right.
I'll just go point by point, if that's okay. So to the idea that the land wasn't stolen, okay, Afrikaners and apartheid apologists lament the fact that Zulus and Nguni people came here also as colonialists and also inhabited large swaths of KwaZulu-Natal. And we obviously know that Zulus took over many different other groups. Okay, so that was, there's that whole history. Now, to the idea that all of this started in 1912 or 1913, no, it started as far back as 1855 with legislation put in place to essentially prevent black people from being able to own their own land. And there are at least 10, if not 12, actual individual pieces of legislation that prevented that. Okay.
Yeah, but they could own land in the land that they actually got, because in 1855 South Africa didn't even exist. There didn't even exist a country like South Africa.
Yeah,
There were
yeah,
two
yeah.
Boer
The union was
republics,
formed in
and then there was the
1984.
Zulu Republic where black people owned all the land, and then there was the massive British colony. So saying that there
Okay.
was this in South
Okay,
Africa would
so
be a
it's
fallacy, because
a,
South Africa didn't even exist back then.
yeah, it didn't exist, but there was land, and there were people, and there were black people, and including tribes who owned a very large portion of land. And then white colonialists came, and they overtook that land. They overthrew those people, and they forced
Yeah, and that have to do
land.
with us now.
Yes. So then, when a union was formed in 1912, that was the situation we were in. We already had a very, very long history dating back hundreds of years of racial segregation, of racial dispossession, of economic injustice. So it obviously didn't just start out of the blue in 1910. So that's my first point on that. Then, to a point, the reason why the Native Land Act is such an egregious act is because it prevented black people from actually owning land. So even if they wanted to start from point zero at that point, they couldn't work their way up and get land from there. Okay, and that is.
But they were in war with the British. Like, and everything belonged to the king back then, to the Zulu king, which was first Shaka and then Dingaan, and then they had a new king. And in the black culture, nothing belongs to anyone except the king. So none of them had any land in any case, except this one individual, which was the Zulu king. And now you're just talking about Zulu land.
Okay, wait. Can you guys hear me by any chance?
Sorry, guys. You get various different cultures across the world and various different kinds of systems of how it works. But to say that that in some way excuses what white people did and how they forcibly took land through war and through force, I mean, that is just a ridiculous argument to make.
So is war only wrong when white people do it and not when black people do it?
You're strawmanning me. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. The fact that we have a country where I think it was at least 75% of people who were black then, and about 80% of people of color throughout the country only own 9% of the land is a great injustice. Anyway,
But at what time was this now? Are we talking about 1855 now, or at what time are we talking about now?
Or
1912.
Anyway, I want to move on because you made quite a few points. So let me go through them one by one. Okay. Yes, the principle of property rights. Yes. In principle, a person should be allowed to own property, and yes, the state should be allowed to protect that property. But we're talking about a democratic state now, okay? So we're talking about a state that represents everyone, not just white people and, not just white South Africans. So yes, we should have some form of justice, and we should have some form of redress for the people who've been harmed so severely economically by this egregious, what I call expropriation without compensation for black people. That is literally what our history is built on, okay? All right. So as to the lease system, yes, the EFF's principle with regards to EWC is a lease system where the government would own 100% of the land in the country, and then that would be leased out. Okay, so that is certainly not. You want to wait for that? That is certainly not the ANC's policy. In fact, the ANC's policy is incredibly piecemeal, and it's still being worked out as to the mechanism of how exactly redress is going to take place. But
have you read this policy yet, Julie?
Which have I read? Which policy?
The policy that the ANC, South African Communist Party coalition, set up just for this specific bill, the one where the bill of expropriation without compensation. Do you know what any of the things that it says?
No, I haven't read that. And
because the bill that the ANC and the South African Communist Party have already written up says that the state will expropriate the land without compensation, and it will belong to the state and only the state. That's the whole point of communism in which we live now. That's the whole point.
No. The Communist Party exists for the purpose of keeping the ANC accountable to its leftist ideals and its leftist roots. So the Communist Party is there to advise, and they often work together with the ANC on matters like this. But there is an independent commission that has been set up by the ANC to investigate the mechanism by which any expropriation without compensation is going to take place. And that is a very detailed and in-depth matter in and of itself. And that's why that commission has been set up. So nothing is hard and fast at this point. Nothing is there laid out. If the Communist Party has made suggestions or come with a document, then I'll be happy to look at that document. But the ANC is walking a tightrope between its people, foreign investors who own a lot of the land, and white farmers who are essentially also, in a lot of ways, holding this whole situation hostage. So the ANC is incredibly reasonable, and they've said over and over again very reasonable things on this issue. So I would have to look at that document. You can send it to me, but I don't think that factors in at this point. There's still an inquiry in process. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't buy into that.
All right, of course we can't argue on something that you never read, but let's say, for instance, let's throw the whole all the suggestions and all the documents that were actually written out, and we say a complete lie, and we say that okay, all the land is going to be expropriated and it's going to be given to poor black people. Okay, so let's make the argument theoretical like that, even though we know that's not true, even though we know that the state is going to own everything. If they were giving the land back to black people, that would still be theft. I mean, you said that black people owned only 9% of the land in 1912, and then they were given
I laid out
13%. So how is it they never owned any of the other land? The other land were occupied and settled by people. It was empty land. Every single history book that was written for the past 400 years we can look at, and it says that. How on earth do we have to give back the land to people who was never there or whose ancestors were never there for the past 400 years? It was empty land. Why would we give a desert back to people who couldn't even survive in the desert? I mean, look at the Karoo. It's a desert. It's impossible to survive in the Karoo without Western technology. The black people didn't have Western technology, so if they were there, they would have died. But we came there. We actually developed it. We used the wind pump, the system of extracting water from the ground, which the black people never had, so that we were able to live there. Do we have to give back that land on which they never even existed?
Okay, listen, Willem. All right. Okay. Ever since these laws, beginning right back in 1855, before there was even a union of South Africa, okay, and you go down the list, there have been 32 laws throughout apartheid history. And you might say, okay, not throughout, but since 1855 until 1991, okay? So there were so many of these laws that prevented black people from having any kind of civil rights, any kind of autonomy, any kind of say, any kind of economic empowerment in their lives, okay? So every time a black person or a person of color works, they only get to a certain point and then they have to go back to where they started from because they either get evicted or because they get invaded or because they get told, no, here's another forcible removal, another demolition, etc., etc. And when you look at the number of claims that have already been made in this country through the willing buyer, willing seller process, we see that there are not even thousands, but millions of stories of forced removals, of evictions, of forcibly removing people off their land. So even though you say, okay, fine, maybe it was only 9%.
I just want to point out there are not million stories of forced
Even
removal.
if it was only 9%
less than 100 stories
of the land that had been
of
owned
the
at
history.
that time by black people, we see that, okay, fine, they were pushed off farmland. Now they had to go and find other land, okay? So now they're living on the peripheries of farm. Then decades later, they've moved to cities. Cities have grown, they've been large urban areas that have flourished.
So they moved to the cities that the white people built, but was that their choice or was it without their, or were they forced to move to the white cities?
But just hang on, okay, you're gonna have to ask that question again, but do you take my point that the number of evictions that every single time a black person saves up enough money to buy a small piece of property or any property, they get forcibly removed again by a government, and this is continuing on to this day. Go ahead. Was their choice?
But I can't take that point because that point is factually incorrect. You're talking about millions of millions of stories of eviction.
Yeah.
And as I said, there were less than 100. There were something like, I think the number is 73, 74 stories in total.
Stories of eviction in South Africa of forced removals.
All right. So, are you talking about removals that happened outside of South Africa or before the existence of South Africa, or what are we talking about?
I'm talking about throughout the duration of apartheid. Like, okay, fine. You want to make the point that all of this only started during apartheid. No, that's not true. Firstly, but even if I was overly kind to you and granted you that point that this stuff only started once a union was formed or once apartheid started, even then we have millions and millions of people who have been evicted over time.
I would guess there were 6
million. Houses demolished and forced to move to other areas. Sophiatown, District 6. These are famous examples.
Okay, Are we talking about 1912 now? Because in 1912 there were less than 1 million black people in southern Africa.
I don't see what that has to do with it. I'm talking about present day. When we're talking about land claims, when we're talking about lawyers who deal with land claims, even just anecdotally, there are millions of stories about people who've been forcibly removed, whose families were removed in the past through these various 33 different laws. So, there have already been thousands of land claims, and they've all been processed under the willing buyer, willing seller policy, but that is still just a small dent in the greater problem.
All right, let's talk about those successful claims of willing buyer, willing seller. What happened there? So 90% of the farms that were given in this policy to black people have failed. Is that also white people's fault?
Look, I mean, we don't have to talk about this in some kind of laying blame fashion, okay? We're not here to say, okay, we're here to attack that group and that racial group is there to attack this group and etc. That's a stupid way of looking at it. These are systemic problems, okay? These are systemic legal problems that have affected our country, okay? So you don't have to go and blame white people. But what you can say is, yes, it has failed. It has been difficult for us to muster to get together the legal necessities and the money from a taxpayer to negotiate with these various farmers and stakeholders who simply refuse to acknowledge facts about what happened in history about their land. So let me give you a good example, okay? There was one particular farm where the state made a generous offer to that particular farmer to compensate him for land where people were living in shacks, and he had a whole sort of community, some of his workers living on. This is now a farm with acres and acres and acres of land. So the state brought in an independent party to evaluate how much the land was worth, and they found that it was worth 4 million. The farmer was asking for 17 million. Okay.
Oh well, that's his inflated number. Society. He can name his price.
Please let me finish. Okay, so now when you have a willing buyer, willing seller kind of policy, this is the kind of situation that you end up with. The farmer has absolutely no reason to let go of that land. So he is going to ask for an extortionately high number, and then the state has to come and negotiate him down to a reasonable market-related price.
Exactly. So what's the problem of paying a market-related price? I mean, that's
he wasn't asking a market-related price. So he was asking for something that was more than 4 times higher what it was actually worth in a market.
And if I want to sell, I drive a Hilux. If I want to sell it for 800,000 rands and nobody wants to buy it, then it's my problem. Then nobody's going to buy it. But if I want to sell it for 200,000, then somebody can buy it. That's how capitalism works.
Okay, but the difference is that you did not steal that Hilux. Do you understand?
Yeah, and nobody stole the land. That's the point of the problem.
No, if you can't agree on this,
only lived on 9% of the land. So
you're denying South African history. You're denying something which is widely accepted by historians everywhere.
No, it's never accepted by any historians. Like, who stole the Karoo and from who?
No, Willem. Let me just reiterate from the beginning, because clearly you haven't heard anything that I said, and this is.
No, I just wanted to ask you, who stole the Karoo and from whom?
Okay, wait. Listen, can you guys hear me by any chance?
Yeah, we hear you, Ronaldo.
Okay. So I have to jump in here. I actually drove up a hill on the farm. So I've taken a lot of effort. So you guys better be appreciative of that. All right.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm here. Okay. And I think that I've heard the last part of this conversation, and it's going a little bit like you guys are just shouting over each other. So can I ask that Willem pose a question, and then I would say give a minute so she can answer it.
I think that's an excellent idea, and then you'll give her a chance to ask me a question, and then I have a minute to answer it as well.
Exactly, and nobody interrupts anybody.
All right, I think that's an excellent idea. All right, as you say, Julie, you're saying that we white people stole the land here in South Africa. Now, my question that I actually asked quite a few times and didn't get any answer, 60% of this country is desert, and only 3% of this country is actually high potential farmable land. And actually, black people didn't even farm. They didn't even have agricultural technology like we have today, or that like we had 400 years ago as Westerners. And we know that they were not physically able to exist in it's at least 70% of South Africa, because they would have died, because the conditions that as black people, as the technology they had, they didn't have the technology to survive there. So that's 70% of the land in which it was physically impossible, and the other 20% of the land in which they didn't occupy. Who stole that land, and from whom did they steal it?
Okay, you say that 60% of South Africa is desert, correct? Okay, and it is largely uninhabited, all right? No one has the technology to survive in most of that land, okay? How did white people create farms and create agriculture in South Africa? They used slave power. They used
No, that's not true.
slavery.
There were never any slaves in South Africa, never any black slaves.
No,
Willem,
no,
let,
no, no,
let
no.
me answer the
We have a
question.
history of black slaves in South Africa. A lot of them were imported from Angola. A lot of them were imported by the Portuguese, etc. And obviously, we imported a great deal of people from um, from elsewhere in the world. Okay, from India.
Most slaves in South Africa were
Slave
Eastern European
population.
white people, and
Willem,
practice ended
I
in
think, Willem, you asked the question,
71.
let Julie answer it, and then you can rebuttal if you want.
All right, sorry, Ronaldo, I'll do that.
Thank you. Okay, so I mean, it's a well-known fact that white people could not farm here without slave power. And at the height of at the height of slavery in South Africa, slaves actually outnumbered white colonials 3 to 1, 3 to 1. And then what we found is that with the Great Track and so on, okay, white colonials found it expedient to not only seize the land, okay, but also to put to work the people that they found there. Okay. So yes, a lot of South Africa was empty, and a lot of it was acquired in that way. A lot of it was also occupied. Just look at KZN, large population of Nguni people. So there you go. Like if you say white people stole the land, yes, great deal of this country, white people did steal the land, and they took it by force through what we would typically war crimes today. Now, I think you had another question here about black people didn't farm. Black people didn't farm. No. They were cattle farmers. They had enormous numbers of cattle, and so it is today still. Cattle farming is what here
20
up
seconds.
in the Transvaal and the northern part of South Africa. That's what the land lends itself towards. Down in the Cape, there was more of your intensive agriculture, and when colonialists came down, they sort of more or less took hold of a lot of the land, created intensive farming there, and that drove away the pastoral people, the Khoekhoe and the San, drove them away and drove them to such desperation that they had to come back and be indentured servants for the white colonials.
Okay, thank you,
That's
Julie.
history.
I'm just going to leave it to Willem to rebuttal.
All right, in the first place, okay, let's look at the facts now. So, Ryk Tolbach was the governor who became governor of the Cape Province in 1751. That was the time when slavery ended. That was long before anyone settled the Karoo. So, saying that the Karoo and these farms were built on backs of slaves is just factually incorrect. And that was also before the time that any of the black tribes of South Africa even came into contact with Europeans, which was only in 1770. So 20 years before the black people of South Africa even came into contact with the white settlers in the Cape, slavery was ended. That's fact number one. Okay, fact number two, you said that black people were cattle farmers, and I thought that was quite funny because they only got cattle after the Europeans came here. If you look at cattle today, you get two types of cattle. The one is called Bos Taurus, and the other one is called Bos Indicus. Now, Bos Taurus means the cattle from Europe, and Bos Indicus means the cattle from India, which means there is no such thing as cattle from Africa because Africans didn't have cattle. Now, let me tell you one more thing. Okay, there is cattle from Africa, and it's a scientific name. I unfortunately can't say because then I'll go to jail for 3 years. It's Sencerus, and then the next part of its scientific name is now the illegal word in South Africa. But guess what? Nobody ever domesticated these cattle, or what we know as buffalo today. So no, black people in South Africa were not cattle farmers. They only got cattle after the Europeans came here and gave it to them.
Right, they traded with them. They traded guns. They traded.
Oh, so you know that they traded with them. Like, so they traded for land as well, right?
Yeah, 2 goats for the hill that the Union Buildings is built on.
Yeah, like the whole, like half of the whole Natal province, for example, was bought from the Ngane in a trade contract that we still have today. That was the actual, we made war against the Swazis for the Zulus and took their cattle, and that was the contract. And so we did that, and then in exchange for that, we got half of Natal. So by that logic, okay, half of Natal belongs to us, belongs to the
Okay,
Boer.
and the other half belonged to the Ngunis, and
No, the other half belonged to
land
the
when
British.
apartheid began. What a ridiculous.
Okay, let me jump in here. Julie, I'm going to hand over to you to ask a question for Willem.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so with regards to all of this, like Willem, what you're saying is that no land was ever stolen from any person of color ever in the history of South Africa, and we know that to be demonstrably false. I'm not actually sure what I want to ask you, so let me just have a look at my notes here. Yeah, actually, like, let me rather just try and rebut some of what you said there.
Well, I actually think it's a valid question.
Let me rather just read you
I
what
don't want to
you
jump
said
in the
about
center here.
slavery, because it certainly didn't end in, what did you say, 1753? Slavery ended in South Africa in the 1830s. And all of our slaves were
That's
people
not
of
true.
color.
British slavery ended in South Africa then, but Dutch slavery ended in 1751.
Okay. And what about indentured servitude? How long did that carry on?
What servitude?
Indentured servitude.
Indentured servitude. What is indentured servitude?
Okay, let me explain. So, indentured servitude is when a group of people has so little economic power and so little autonomy over their lives that they are forced to work for another person for a tiny wage that hardly sustains them, that only barely keeps them alive.
Okay, I hear what that is. Okay.
What
wait.
white life expectancy versus black life expectancy is 2 completely different things, because we just had a complete history from the beginning that was racially segregated, and we've had the last 100 to 170 years, we've seen so many laws, law after law after law, dispossessing people of color and forcing them into poverty, and that translates into generational poverty. And unfortunately, we have to address that, or fortunately, actually. And here we are today. We have a constitution that lays out very clearly that we need
So, Julie, what's the question that I need to answer here?
I don't know. What do you say to the fact that the constitution lays out very clearly that
So just tell me again what the question is that I need to answer.
will you give me a chance to ask you now?
Okay, Julia, I think just get to the exact question so that Willem can rebuttal or can at least answer it, and then I'll leave to you to rebuttal.
Willem, are you aware that in our constitution it lays out very clearly that there's a need for redress in this country for the very many laws that have disadvantaged and dispossessed people of color in this country? And what do you say about that redress?
Well, I am aware of many things in our constitution, and we actually have a very bad, horrible constitution. We were actually learned in our schools that we have the most progressive constitution in the world, which doesn't mean it's a good constitution. It actually just means it's a very left-wing constitution, which is actually horrible, because if you look at any place where left-wing legislation has ever been put into place, like Detroit, for example, it inevitably turns into a shithole like Africa. But in any case, so I just want to to your indentured servitude thing that you explained there. Well, indentured servitude is just okay. You say it's bound by a contract, but it's not free. But then the employee is being oppressed by his employer. You know what? That's just an intersectionalist myth. That's one of those things that you learn when you go to college and you learn like anti-facts. Like, you know what happens? You finish matric in this whole system of being brainwashed. Then you go to college and then you learn all these anti-facts that are being written by this anti-factual professor who wrote you all of this intersectionalist stuff that is just myths that doesn't even exist in real life, because it's just completely ridiculous to say that someone who was employed and was paid a wage by his employer and any time which he didn't want to go there was enslaved by the employer. That's just a complete neo-Marxist joke. And that's the thing that I actually don't like about our colleges today is people, especially when they study the liberal arts, they actually end up dumber when they come out of college than before they even went there.
Okay, Willem, everything that you've just said is just you saying what your opinion is and calling it fact. Like, none of what you said was actually accurate. In fact, I don't think you even know what
Willem, let her answer.
Servitude myth.
Excuse me?
Is there any proof in this world for this whole indentured servitude myth of South Africa?
You know okay, when I spoke to you about indentured servitude, you didn't know what the definition of indentured servitude was.
Well, I know now because I opened this Wikipedia page and I see it's a load of crap because I just read what it is while you were talking.
Like, you saying it's a load of crap is not an argument. That's your opinion. Okay.
I know it's not an argument, but there's also not any argument for it. Or can you provide any proof of that's actually being existing?
Okay, well, okay. I think Julie, you heard what he had to say, uninterrupted. Let Julie finish what she has to say.
Okay.
No, I said what I had to say. I said that indentured servitude, as this definition is here on Wikipedia, there's no proof for it in the world. There's no facts supporting this. It's just all these new neo-Marxist myths, and now we have to say it is fact. Like, what is the facts that support this?
Sorry, Willem. Throwing around words like neo-Marxist is also not an argument. Okay?
I know, but the fact that there's no facts supporting it is an argument.
Okay, Willem, you're interrupting her.
For another day, okay? Because we're veering into other topics here that has to do with capitalism, Marxism, and we're even going into various other things like intersectionality, okay? And I'm not sure if you know what intersectionality is, okay? But we do have a very progressive constitution. It is a very highly rated constitution the world over, okay? And there is a mandate in that constitution to rectify the facts which you deny, the fact of our history, which is the dispossession of people of color in South Africa. And if you want to do a simple test, okay? If you want to do a simple test as to whether people were dispossessed or not, let me ask you this question. Do you want to give up your land or do you not want to give up your land? And do you think that your land and land ownership and stability and the ability to stay in a place and not be evicted from it is beneficial to you in various ways, including economically? And if that is the case, and I'm guessing you are going to say, yes, my land is valuable to me, it provides me with various forms of valuable things like an income or a sense of stability, or I can rent it out or farm it or work it, why then is it that you seem to think that there's no such thing as indentured servitude where people don't have the ability to do that? So since apartheid and every colonial piece of history before that disproportionately affected people of color in a negative way, how is there not a need for redress in our country?
All right, so this is quite a funny question to me, because you say that I have land that provide all these things for me. I don't really have any land. I actually don't own a house or any property or anything, so it's not really making any difference to me. But in any case, I just want to say I'm very happy that you know that all these people have been dispossessed, because you're just, I think, 100 million rands richer, Julie, because the Transvaal Agricultural Union has actually set out a reward. I believe it's 100 million rand for anyone who can prove any of his lands was stolen. In this, well, any of the land that he lives was stolen by anyone else. So I'm very happy for you. You can just go give your proof in there at the Transvaal Agricultural Union, and you will be 100 million rands richer. So you'll be the first person in South Africa to be able to prove it. But yo, I'm so happy for you, man. You can buy yourself so many Ferraris with that money, eh?
We've seen many thousands of cases under, as I've said earlier, under the willing buyer, willing seller model, where people actually do come and prove that they do have a right to the land and that they have deeds and all of these things, but they were evicted and forcibly removed by the government. Okay, so if that isn't EWC, I don't know what is. And you can go down the list of these cases. There's thousands of them. And just the fact that 10% of what was formerly white land has been transferred, or some of it the people went overseas, but there have been black families that get their land back, and there's your proof. So sometimes it takes a while to prove. Sometimes it's anecdotal because they didn't have the title deeds anymore. But certainly there's proof. There is evidence and there is proof, and that is for our courts to decide. But like whether you
why don't you go give those proof at the agricultural union then? Because 0 cases of proof have ever been given into them. So you can win a lot of money doing that. Why don't you go do it?
You are making a ridiculous argument. You're asking me a ridiculous question. I'm sorry.
Let me jump in here. I think we need to bring it closer to land expropriation without compensation in South Africa. So let me ask a question to both of you to get your input on this, right? Let's say land expropriation without compensation is going to take place. Do you trust the government to be in charge of all land in this country? And let me ask Julie to answer first, and then I'll ask Willem to answer.
Okay, so let me just clarify. You said all land. Are we talking about a hypothetical scenario where the government owns all the land in the country?
Well, we can either break it up in an aspect of their own specific areas of the country, or they own all of it. So let's just say it can either be 10%, 20%, or 100%. Let me just say, do you trust the government to be in charge of land that was expropriated?
Yes.
Can you give a reason as to why you say that?
Okay, the government right now is in charge of, I think, about 14% of the land. Our government has a very clear mandate under the Constitution and under the Bill of Rights to do what is right by the South African people and see that economic justice is restored. And when you look at what members of the ANC and the ruling party say about this issue, they are incredibly reasonable and I would even say piecemeal about it. They have a delicate dance to do between various different parties with various interests. And I think they do very well under the constraints. So yes, I would trust the government to be in charge of land where expropriated. I don't think that's going to come to be. I think it's going to be given to the rightful owners. But yeah, I mean, it's a strange hypothetical, but sure.
Okay, Willem, your rebuttal.
All right, so no, I would not trust the government to own all the land in this country. Firstly, just not even looking at their competence, the fact that the government needs to own all the land in this country is just morally wrong, and it's just it's theft. The government wants to steal what belongs, not what doesn't belong to them. And would I trust them to actually manage all this land? No, I wouldn't, because if you look at everything the ANC government in this country has done up until that today, was a massive failure. They turned in they turned a first world country with the best, some of the best healthcare in the world, probably the second best army in the world, and some of the best infrastructure in the world into a literal shithole, like Trump said. And there's no evidence to claim otherwise. Like, just look at South Africa. Like, people are actually excrementing in the streets. The crime is highest in Africa, the highest murder rate in Africa, the highest murder rate in the world. Our little rainbow nation wannabe friends of Sweden are in second place, but we are still number one. But in any case, like, there's literally nothing in this country in which the current government has actually succeeded in doing it right.
Okay, so a question that I've gotten, I'm sorry, I don't want to take over. This is the last question that I'll pose just to give some structure to this debate, is the fact that, Willem, you labeled this discussion, white people should support expropriation without compensation. So just to clarify, according to Julie and you, do you, Julie, let me ask this to you. Do you understand that land expropriation will affect more than just white people? So it'll affect black middle class individuals too? Or do you only support the narrative that the land expropriation should only affect white people?
Well, as a matter of fact, it isn't just going to affect white people, that's true. So there are certain chiefdoms throughout the country that are also going to face expropriation. What we sometimes refer to as, these chieftains, Zulu kings, etc. And there is also going to be expropriation there for the greater good of the public. And that's one of the things we have to take into account, is that it's for the greater good. With regards to the way that the debate has been framed, white people should support EWC. Yes, all people should support EWC, and that includes white people. And I think, I think white people need to come to the party a little bit and support this and get on board with the rest of the country. If I might just have a moment to rebut some of what Willem said earlier about our country. Yes.
Do that after Willem has answered his question.
No, I don't really have anything to say, Ronaldo. I think it's quite a stupid question. I think nobody in this country should support expropriation because it will affect everyone. The black middle class, who is actually owns more property than the white class, will also lose all of their property. So no black person or white person should support this ridiculous communist narrative and principle. But yeah, I actually want to just go back to the question answer style. I just want to ask Julie one question. Seeing as she is white, I believe you're a white individual. Which part of the country did your ancestors steal specifically?
I mean, my family is from Hendrina, and some of my family is from Pietermaritzburg. So I'm guessing that there would be land there that they had stolen.
I'm sorry. So which part did you say that your family steal?
I imagine that they would have stolen in Hendrina and Pietermaritzburg.
So will your family then work hard enough to buy back Pietermaritzburg and Hendrina and give it back to its rightful owners then?
That's a ridiculous question.
Because I believe my family didn't steal anything, so luckily we know your family did. So my family, which didn't steal anything, won't have to pay for your family who did steal it.
Fundamental fact about our history, okay? Everyone knows, including historians, that land was stolen here, including the very many lawyers who have worked on land redress in this country to this date. Okay, I'm not going to go there again. You said earlier that the government has been a massive failure, and that before we had the best healthcare some of the best healthcare in the world. Yes, but only for white people.
No.
Only for a tiny number of people in the country.
Medical, and it was only for black people, and they got world-class heart transplants for R2.
No, Willem.
Hendrik Verwoerd Hospital in the north of Pretoria was a hospital only for black people, and black people could go there and get what's a heart clip? A heart valve transmission for R2.
Okay, you're going to have to provide a source for that, because I believe that they were inadequately served, and there was no infrastructure for black people. Most black people lived in terrible conditions with no electricity. The ANC-led government over the last 20 odd years has built enormous infrastructure across the country. The fact that most black people remain poor is a matter of white farmers and transnational corporations keeping the country down. But that's a whole other debate for a whole other day.
Okay, even Malema admitted that there were a lot of hospitals built for black people, and all these hospitals went
Oh,
in the ANC government. It was literally said by Malema in a speech where he said in his little hometown where he grew up, there was a hospital that was built by the apartheid government, and
yeah.
under the ANC
I
rule,
didn't
that
say
hospital
that.
went under.
I didn't say they didn't build hospitals. I
No,
said that
you said there were no infrastructure, and I quote you now. You said there were no infrastructure for black
I
people.
exaggerate, but there was a large numbers of people in this country. The majority of people in this country were hopelessly underserved under apartheid, discriminated against. They didn't have basic human rights. They were second-class citizens, if not third-class citizens.
Okay, what basic human right did they specifically not have?
No. We're going into like now the specifics of apartheid and the whole history of apartheid, and I don't have time to explain that to you. It's
Okay,
a
well
Okay,
let's move back. Wait, let's move back to the topic at hand then, and let me hand over to Julie then to ask a question, and then for Willem to answer.
all right.
okay. All right. I don't know. Ronaldo, I don't know where we can really go from here because we disagree on some of the fundamentals. So I would just be repeating the same question of if you're not aware that historically the land was stolen. So
Okay,
I
well
mean,
then,
I can't repeat that question again.
can you then? Well, you can frame the question as
Why don't we let the guys in the comments ask questions, Ronaldo?
okay. Well, yeah. Well, let's do that. But then up until that point, until I find a question that's good enough, Willem, is there anything that you would like to ask then?
Ask Julie now. No, not really. I mean, I did already ask her to provide proof of any of these outrageous claims that she made, like there was no infrastructure and black people had no basic human rights and all of those claims. So I asked for a specific example of a human right that a basic human right that they didn't have. But I don't know what did it they have.
God,
I was born six
you
years
know
old.
for a fact,
I don't
you
have
know
that.
for a fact that apartheid was a crime against humanity. To go into the specifics of that would take us 3 days. We would be sitting here for 3 days talking about all of the problems. I mean,
All right, so I don't think we don't have any more questions then, but can't we then just get to the comment section here and see which what the people in the comments ask? There are 200 people watching right now, so I'm pretty sure someone can come up with a good question. Yeah,
Um,
someone asked, Julie, do you have a house, or that house, or is it yours that you're living in?
on renting?
Okay, but so you don't own a house.
No.
Well, then you can't answer this question. Okay, here's a very good
Anyway,
question. Where do you think the blacks came from before they were here in South Africa?
they came from slightly north from here.
So in other words, West Africa, Ghana, and there.
Look, I mean, gradually throughout history, many people migrated slightly south to current day, present day South Africa.
So and the white people also gradually throughout history moved into South Africa,
Correct.
and they were actually in more than in more than 87% of the country, white people were here first. So what a
I don't know about that. You see, you're also making very outlandish claims.
No, this is actually not an outlandish claim. This is supported by the 1912 Land Act,
Yeah,
which said that black
prior
people
to
were
that,
living on 9% of
but,
the
but,
total land in South Africa, and then they were given 13%. So
but,
after the Land Act, they were actually given more land, and then they were living on 13% of the land in South Africa.
either you are okay with various kinds of imperialism and colonialism or you're not. We're not debating that, okay? Yes, black people came here, and yes, some of them were imperialists and took over a large part of the country. Now, white people, similarly, they were colonialists, they were imperialists, they came here, they overthrew large parts of the country, they claimed land, some of it was left empty due to disease, etc. But originally, before white people came here, much of the most of the Cape was occupied, or I should say inhabited by the Khoisan, the Khoikhoi, and the San tribes. And these were pastoral people, okay? In other words, they used to herd their animals around. And with the
You mean they
arrival
were
of
nomadic?
with the arrival of more and more white people, their way of life was severely disrupted, and there was, in all effect, a genocide here of the Khoisan. So
Okay,
I
here's a
don't
good
think it's the
question.
point, of trying to say that two wrongs make a right. That because
Okay,
black people also moved here and also took over various parts of land, that doesn't negate the many, many, many crimes committed by white people under colonialism. It's not a
okay.
wash.
So here's a question that Rob M asks that I think both of you can answer if you want to. It says, do you think this removal of Section 25 gives the government total power without any accountability?
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty obvious it does give the government total power without any accountability because it's taking any sort of property rights out of the constitution. I think it's very obvious.
Julie?
I think it's a bit of a false question because they're not removing it as far as we know, they're amending it.
Well,
There
yes,
might be certain
amending.
provisions that change within it, but there's also the argument that the Constitution doesn't even need to be updated in order for there to be EWC. The Constitution is written in such a way that says just and equitable restoration, which means that all things balanced, the public interest, the good of the public, the good of the individuals involved, the government has a right to step in and exact justice in a situation, in any given situation. And they have to take into consideration all parties and the public good. So
So
under that,
the government
theoretically,
needs
it is
needs to
possible
take
to.
away all the black tribes that moved to South Africa's land as well because they also stole it. Well, if you take your definition of stolen as
No, no,
stealing.
no, no, no. All I'm asking for is that we be consistent, okay? Either we're gonna go, either we're gonna agree that various different parts of South Africa were acquired in various different ways, and yes, there was colonialism, and yes, it did happen with both black and white people, or we're not, okay? And but having said that, that doesn't mean that you can draw an equivalency between the way that white people acted and the way that black people acted, especially the last 170 years. Okay, so I'm not trying to say that that land was never forcibly taken by, for instance, Shaka Zulu back in the day. I'm not saying that you're strawmanning me. All I'm asking for is that we acknowledge the various different laws under apartheid and even before that, and the disproportionate violence inflicted by colonials before that, white colonials especially. Okay, so I'm not like you're trying to make it a wash. It's not a wash between just because at certain points in history, Shaka Zulu also did certain violent things. That doesn't negate all the various crimes that we're actually talking about next, we're actually trying to deal with. So it's a bit of
Okay.
a red herring, I'm sorry.
So there's a question that I think I'm not sure how relevant it is, but I think it does speak on how how you perceive the world to be, because obviously it is an internal thing. So the question is, if white people must return land in South Africa, then would you agree that black people in Europe must return the land too?
And it's a ridiculous question, guys. It's ridiculous. We're talking about systemic problems here.
No, no, I understand. I think I'm just referring to what the comment section is saying, and the question I think speaks more on ideology. You can, I mean, obviously, I understand it's not in a South African context, but I think it does speak to
Okay,
an
let me
ideology
let me
that you might
answer that
hold.
question as best that I can. If African people had gone into Europe and colonized Europe and
Like
forced
they're doing now.
people from their homes, yes, there should be EWC in Europe, but that is not the case.
Willem, your answer.
No, I'm not. I'm not even gonna go into that question. But any case, I just want to ask Julie. She said earlier that okay, yes, there were massive colonialism by black people, for instance, Shaka Zulu. and the Xhosas, and we can agree on that. And they were also forced removals by them of the Khoi tribes in the area. So, but then she said that, but nothing compares to like what white people did. Is that now brutality wise, or how do you mean nothing compares to what white people did?
Oh my goodness. I mean, where to begin? Like, this is really literally the history of our country, you know? Brutality, certainly. Um, uh,
Okay, so let me give you an example of what the black people did. Like they would cut off a woman's breasts, and then set her vagina to fire. As you're a woman, I think you can relate to how that would be. Have you ever in your life heard of a white person that did that? This is something that the Zulus did all the time. For example, just one example.
Look, Willem, one of the
Because
things,
if we're going to talk brutality, then nothing
No, but
nothing
Willem, let her answer.
closely to what black people did in the past. White people maybe killed and they shot people, but they never ever tortured them like black people did.
of
And
course
saying
they
they
did.
did would
Of
just
course
be
they did,
factually
then.
so incorrect.
Of course they did. We have a
What
long,
did
long
they do?
history of
Like, name one
slavery.
example.
Okay, wait, let me read you something. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the brutalities simply from slavery in South Africa. They used to beat their slaves senseless with a shamble. They used to chain them up. I mean,
Who did that? Who
there
used
have
to
been
train people?
untold acts of violence simply from slavery alone in South Africa. I
But
mean,
haven't
I go
we
on a case
established
by
that there
case.
were no slavery of black
I
South
can go on a
Africans?
case.
Willem, you're loading
That's
the question. Let her
a very
answer it.
straight on fact.
I can't go on a case. Oh, sorry.
Okay, is anybody still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Are you there?
That's
I am, yeah.
every
Okay.
individual act of brutality from a white person on a black person. In this
Okay, let me just give Julie a chance to answer the question, because like whenever she answers, Willem, you loading more questions on her. So you asked a question about brutality from black people on black people, and she wants to rebuttal with giving examples of white people doing exactly the same thing. So I'll give her the opportunity to answer.
Yeah, guys, look, I'm sorry, I don't have any specific examples, but what I can say is that just if you look at the history of Christopher Columbus, right, they used to cut off people's hands, and other colonies in Africa for that matter. They used to chop off a person's hand for not working hard enough. They used to murder people with complete impunity. Literally, that person would have no human rights. So I mean, for you to come and say that, okay, at some point in the past, you heard some example of a black person being brutal and torturous to another black person. I mean, really, it's like, again, you're trying to make a wash of the situation, and it really isn't. But guys, listen, I don't know if we're planning on wrapping this up anytime soon. It's been
Yeah,
about,
I think
but
we
I'm
can.
happy to come and debate you on any of these issues if you'll have me again.
Okay,
Now,
well,
I
let
think
me
I
let
think we
let
can
me
give
jump
our
in here, and
closing
then
statements now.
let me jump in and say who started who did the opening statement, so that I can give this person the last chance to speak. Then.
Okay, so
She
last
did.
one, so you
She'll
can.
have she can get the closing statements.
Okay, so Willem, I'm going to hand over to you to give your closing statement.
All right. So yeah, I think most of the things that we discussed here is ridiculous. None of the things that Julie even said was even based on facts, like that white people just stole the land, and it's just not supported by the statistics. We know that only 9% of the land were even occupied by black people, and then they were given 13% back in 1912. And she also said that millions of black people were enslaved, even though slavery ended in 1751 for the Dutch, and I think 1820 or something for the British. And by that time, there were just a few 100,000 people in Africa. That was just after the Mfikani, which basically almost killed all the black people in Africa by the Zulus. We know that in 1912 there were less than a million black people in South Africa. So I really don't know where that millions of slaves came from. The other thing she said is that millions of people were dispossessed. which is really just factually incorrect because there were less than 100 cases of forced removal in the history of this country. And anyone who was forcibly removed, I think, should be compensated for it, and that includes the many white people who were dispossessed, especially in Limpopo, in the northern part of this country, close to the Limpopo River, a river where a lot of white farmers were dispossessed to give that land to the Venda and the Tsonga, and that also includes a lot of people in the old Stellaland Boer Republic, which is now where Vryburg and Bophuthatswana that time was, which those white people were dispossessed there. That also includes many of the British settlers in the Sierveld or the Sauerveld, and I believe those people should also be dispossessed. They were all white, and I also think that the black people who were forcibly removed, a few cases of it happening, should also be you know, they should also be dispossessed, but or not dispossessed. I mean, compensated for their dispossession. But it's just factually true that those cases of dispossession are such a small minority of the people living here in this country and such a small minority of the actual land in this country that saying that we should dispossess all white people and all black people and give all of the land to the state is quite the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. I think it's the most brainwashed narrative one can take to just get a Marxist state in this country. And that's all I have to say on this particular topic.
Okay, Julie, I'll hand over to you for your closing statement.
Okay. I think we may have been having a little bit of a false debate here in the sense that it was impossible for black people to acquire land and also in many of these cases. So like I said in the beginning, it may have started out with say now 9% and then it later turned to 13% of the land actually owned by black people. But also apartheid made it impossible for them to own certain kinds of land or to get the economic means to even buy land. Okay. This idea that only a tiny number of black people were disaffected or evicted or forcefully removed from their land is complete and utter trash. It is not true. The history of our country is the history of black people and people of color being dispossessed. And there's countless examples of that, and it's a well-known historical fact. So I don't know why that you say that isn't a fact when it is absolutely, that is a ridiculous claim to make. And then when we're talking about, yeah, I mean, I just want to end off and say that, like, you really need to go and look at history, and you really need to study it. You really need to have a look at how black people were disaffected, and this straw man as well that the government is going to take away all the land and that it's all going to be owned by the government. This is absolutely ridiculous. Like, I'm not even going to address that. It's completely and utterly false. Yeah, and that's me.
All right, Willem, I'll hand over to you to end off the video.
Thank you, Ronaldo, for being our moderator, and thank you, Julie, for coming up. You're welcome to log off now. I'm just going to quickly talk about a few other things. The one thing is that I was at the Kill the Boer book launch this morning, and it was really a very emotional, great event for me. And a lot of things has been said there. You can see on Twitter. I tweeted a bit about it there. And also, I would highly recommend this book. I have read it, and I'm going to also make a video reviewing it. So that's the one thing I have to say. The other thing I have to say is that as I said, I'm holding this get together on the 7th of July. That would be in. Sorry, I'm just gonna. I'm not quite sure about the venue yet. I do have a venue, but it's not finalized. But it should be finalized by hopefully by Monday. So I'll also make a video inviting you guys there. This will be for all of my Afrikaans viewers, and it's going to be a talk on the real history of South Africa and why we need to produce material that tells the story of the real history of South Africa. And we know I've been in school after the after apartheid and after the ANC took over with their new syllabus, and it was just ridiculous how much propaganda is spread there. And I want to start making videos about the true history of South Africa, of the Afrikaner people, the English people here, also of when the black people came here, every specific tribe, what land they occupied, all this real history I want to document, and also the real history about apartheid. So if you want to come to this,
101.
then you email here. My email is here in the description, paulfathermedia@gmail.com. You're welcome to attend this, and yeah, it's going to be a great event, I think. So just pop me an email there, and also thank you guys for listening, and thanks for everyone who tuned in. Hopefully we'll have a yeah. Let's see. I'm going to ask you guys: did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the debate? 1 for yes, 2 for no. See what the people says. Ronaldo, what's your thoughts on the debate?
I have to say, as a centrist, it was very hard to not get involved in the discussion. I think both of you made some points that obviously I both agree and disagree with. So it was entertaining. I think I would have handled the debate a little bit differently. Um, I think that it should have stayed on topic with regards to land expropriation without compensation, and not have gone so deep into the history. But that's just me. But I do think, like I said, it's hard to disagree with somebody that's a little bit more right leaning, and then somebody that's also considerably left leaning. So, yeah, maybe I'll debate both of you on my live stream again when I have one.
All right, great, Ronaldo. Thanks for being here. I think I'll end off here this discussion, and thanks for everyone who watched, and also thanks Julie for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me, Willem.